Hey guys, this is AJ Galanti, former president of the Danbury Trashers, and you're listening to my man Sean, the Sheriff Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to an exclusive episode of The Sheriff. Guys, today I'm actually blessed to not only have a gentleman that I've looked up to, but I also get to work with this gentleman in the very, very near future. Now, ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is the original and only play-by-play voice of the Bad Boys of Hockey Danbury Trashers. He's called over 1,000 games and, of course, probably close to 1,000 hockey fights. He's worked in the NHL, AHL, NCAA, NWHL, PHL, and, of course, the notorious United Hockey League. Ladies and gentlemen, he is also the newest member of the Icewars International broadcast team, alongside myself and Chris Therien, a.k.a. Bundy. This takes place, ladies and gentlemen, at the River Tree Resort and Casino in Enoch, Alberta. And ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Mr. Phil Giubileo. How are you doing today, my friend?
Oh, what an introduction. And I'm so happy to be here, Sheriff. Thank you so much for having me. And this is just going to be such a fantastic event on May 21st in Alberta. I can't wait to be there. I've never been to that part of Canada. I'm looking forward to what's going to be the start of just an amazing brand new combat sport.
Yes, brother. And dude, I mean, we talked before the recording. I'm so excited for this because not only am I a former, like a enforcer type player, but brother, I'm a big fan of the sport. And any fan of the sport that likes the physical side, this is incredible for them. This is like going to like tough guy heaven, in my opinion. So I'm telling you, man, like I'm so excited for this that if I wasn't a part of it, I would definitely be tuning in. I know that it's a pay-per-view event, right?
It is. It's going to be on FITE TV. And here's the best part. It's $20. It's $19.95. It's $20. That is bargain basement pricing for what's going to be an amazing event. And whether it's you hanging out on your own, you bring a bunch of friends over, some beers, crack open some snacks, and it's a bargain event, but it's really going to be such a great night of entertainment to find out who the king of the rink is going to be. And Sheriff, like you, always a big fan of the hockey fights. And that was the case, since day one when I started watching hockey. So obviously being the voice of the Danbury Trashers, kind of getting that crash course in calling hockey fights in those 2 seasons with Danbury. And then I went on to spend 9 years in the American Hockey League and called a ton of fights in that league. They were still pretty physical at that point from between 2006 in 2015. And here's the great thing about it. I'm still a huge hockey fan. Obviously I broadcast in hockey, but the fights, you just don't see that anymore. You don't see nearly as many, although the last couple of weeks, it's been a little bit spicy in terms of watching a few more fights here and there. So it's kind of like it's like Christmas Day in May for anyone that's a hockey fight fan.
For sure, man. And like the one thing about it, like I look forward almost to every day just to hear the next set of news for Ice Wars. Like I was talking to Charlie about it the other day, like when Chris Therien, for example, was announced, that, you know what I mean? I'm like, wow, this is incredible, man. Not only am I a huge fan, I mean, I watched the guy play in the NHL for 12 years, but just the opportunity of getting to work with a guy like that. When they announced your name, buddy, I'm like, that was the voice of the Danbury Trashers guy, right? Because because I watched the Netflix documentary, brother. You were all over that, right? So I appreciate it. I looked forward to it. I look at it as my first big thing, to be honest with you, man. It's my first pay-per-view event. Trust me, this is like getting called up to the NHL for me, my friend.
I feel that way in a sense. I've never done a pay-per-view, at least in that sense, for a big night like this. And so for all of us, it's kind of, we're on that stage for the first time. And I got to say, I'm going to be in the most well-protected broadcast booth of all time. And I've done hockey games. When I was at Bridgeport, we get the occasional guy who's a healthy scratch come in and do color with me. So I've had guys like Kip Brennan, who was a real good, tough guy back in the day. He's done color with me, and Joe Finley, who's a big giant piece. I've got you and Chris Therien, one on my left and one on my right. I mean, no one's getting to me that night. Doesn't matter what I say. I can do anything that night. I know I'm going to be well protected. So I'm really excited about that. And it's going to be such a great show. And really, I don't think anybody knows what to expect. And here's the thing. And I've worked with AJ Galante for years. I've worked with Jimmy Galante for years. The one thing I can tell you is that this is going to be completely unpredictable, because everything I've ever done with these guys for almost 20 years now, you just don't know what's going to happen. You know, things are going to develop, things are going to change. We're going to be figuring stuff out on the night of the show, and, you know, we're going to get curveballs thrown our way, but it just makes for such an exciting night.
I mean, I agree with you 100%. That was going to be my next thing that I wanted to talk about. Like, I wanted to talk about AJ and Jimmy Galante, because I know that you have a lot of experience working with them. You know, I was lucky enough to have AJ as a special guest on my show as well. So that was kind of the beginning of our relationship, in a tense where I believe it is a friendship now, right? And AJ's such a nice guy, man. And I'm just so happy to be a part of the movement. But my question to you is, Ben, when it came to me that I had the opportunity to be a part of this, like, I jumped on it right away. I asked you before the recording, you know, did you have any idea? And like you were saying, you know, you kind of had a little bit of an idea, but there just wasn't a confirmation. You know, how early before the announcement did you actually find out, or was that pretty much when it was confirmed?
You know, probably maybe about a week and a half beforehand is when I spoke with Jimmy and also spoke with Charlie, and had everything finalized for me to come out and do the event. And, you know, you cross all the I's and all, you know, T's and I's and all that stuff with the paperwork. And yeah, so really not that much time. And, you know, I'd wondered for a long time, ever since the event was announced, was I going to get a shot at doing this? And we had some preliminary discussions, and really just not knowing. I know obviously Jimmy and AJ play a big part in it. There's a lot of other people too. It's up in Canada. There's other, you know, there's a production company involved. There's this, that, and the other thing. So you never really know until you get the, you know, you get the call, you get the tap on the shoulder. We want you to come in and do this. And, you know, as Jimmy said to me, you know, he's like, well, Phil, you're the perfect guy for this. You were the voice of the Trashers. Like, who else would it be to do this? And, you know, in the play-by-play sense, yeah, of course, I'm going to agree with that. I'm not going to disagree. Now, it's been a while since I've called a hockey fight. I've worked in college hockey now for a few years, but, you know, it's like riding a bicycle. And the great thing too is, you know, one thing that's different, I have you and I have Chris, and this is going to be video. So a lot of what I'm going to do is really kind of lean on you guys, especially, you know, with the experience. And I know when it comes to the penalty minutes, you have a lot more penalty minutes than Chris Therien, but, you know, he's dropped the mitts too in the NHL, and there's psychology involved in it. And, you know, even wondering and thinking of all the years that I've worked in hockey, and, you know, fighting is there's the different types, right? You would have the fighting out of passion. Something happens in the game, a guy you know, your big goal scorer gets hit. You got to jump in, you got to go after a guy, and you've got to kind of set things right. You'd have the stage fights where it really is just kind of like part of the show. But, and I'm going to turn this around. I'm going to ask you a question. Think about that. All the years you played in the American Hockey League, and when you got to play in the NHL, and you're there focusing, preparing for the game and also for a fight. This is a little bit different, because you go in and you know it's going to happen, right? You know, you're going to go there and you're going to have to drop the gloves, and it's a different kind of way to prepare, because it's not just about winning the fight. It's not just about, am I going to take this guy down? It's I got to knock this guy out. I've got to throw punches. There's judges scoring this. If heavens forbid this actually goes 2 full 1 minute rounds, I don't know how that's going to happen. I'll be completely honest with you. I think the fact that you watch a 1 minute fight when two guys are just throwing, you know, you're gassed after that 1 minute. I'm really excited to see. I'm interested to see what's going to happen if you get to a second round and you've got to throw for 60 more seconds. I have no clue what's going to happen. And I don't think any of the guys going into the ring, into the ice to drop the gloves know that either.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, Phil. You're sure getting me excited, my man. I'm all fired up, buddy. You're doing a great job. That's incredible. Let me add to that a little bit, my friend. Now, first off, I wanted to talk about the dynamics with me, you, and Chris. Now, I agree with Jimmy Galante. You're the absolute perfect guy to do the play-by-play. Why? Because when AJ and Jimmy started like the bad boys of hockey, we all know, especially, and for the listeners, you guys know, you guys all watched the documentary. You guys all knew what AJ's vision was. You guys all knew that AJ had this incredible, unique passion for wrestling and for characters. And he had this passion for hockey and how he combined the two. And what did he get? The bad boys of hockey, the biggest characters, the toughest guys, and the team that wasn't going to take any trash, right? That's what it was all about.
Absolutely.
You, my friend, but you, my friend, you brought that to life. You brought it to life. You were part of making it a success. For those 2 seasons, for any hockey person, man, that was like Hollywood seasons. That was, it became a documentary. I'm seeing all this stuff about a movie, which I'm going to ask you about after. But at the time, it was like a movie though, Phil. You guys put so much entertainment for people like me that appreciate that kind of stuff. You have no idea, bro. You got it, man. Hats off to you, man. I give you so much credit. You were part of that movement, man. That was something that's never happened before. It will probably never happen again unless you guys start another team.
I think if Jimmy and AJ started another team, they would suspend the team before they took the ice. They know it's coming now. Here's the thing. Going into it, when I was hired, and it was a few months beforehand, I had a sense of what the marketing was going to be like. I had seen the logos and the bad boys and Evil Empire and stuff. So I started to kind of get a sense, at that time, I really didn't know yet who was on the team. Only a handful of players were signed, but then you just started seeing more tough guys coming in, tough guy after tough guy, and, still skilled guys as well. And it wasn't until you saw like the first 2 or 3 games, you knew, like, holy crap, this is going to happen every night. And I gotta figure it out as a broadcaster. How am I going to bring that to the fans? And how am I going to make this different? And, what I did, and I'll be honest, that was the first pro hockey team I worked for. And I had 1 year of hockey under my belt. I did a year in the USHL for a team that was god awful. They were not a good team. And they surely didn't fight very often. And so I was like, well, what am I going to do that's different? And I kind of went in line a little bit with the wrestling approach and thinking about what AJ's vision was. And I was enough of a wrestling fan at the time and thinking about a guy like Jim Ross, who really was synonymous with WWE wrestling at that time. And even before that, just kind of as that just kind of dominant play-by-play announcer. And I'm like, I'm gonna go a little bit in that direction and go a little bit more over the top. And if you hear a hockey now, you watch a game now and you hear a hockey fight called, what you normally see is you see the play-by-play guy just shuts up and doesn't say anything, or they low key it. And between you and me and the thousands of fans watching the podcast, I don't know if that's a written rule by the NHL, if that's something they're trying to dictate, but it's not what I would bring to the table. And I'm sure if I got an NHL job tomorrow, I'd probably have to fall in line with those guys, but there's not many fights. But in this case, I went over the top. Definitely when guys were dropping the gloves, it was why people were going to Danbury. They wanted to see the Trashers win, but they went out there to see the show. I mean, it was just, it was hockey and everything else around it. So when you came out to see the show, you had to give them the show. You had to give them that over the top. That was what really kind of put the little accent mark on the fights, aside from just what was going on, out there on the ice.
100%. And trust me, Phil, like, I get it. I remember talking to AJ about the same topic that I'm about to say. The LNAH, brother, the LNAH, the semi-pro league in Quebec, that league, every team tried to be like the Trashers. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying they were able to accomplish that type of show, but that's what the goal was. Le Show is like a known thing in that league where that's what the people are coming for, to see Le Show. It used to be 4 or 5 fights. Now it's 1 or 2, but they still call it Le Show, right?
Yeah.
And so I get it. I totally get it. I accredit you the animation. It was incredible. I've seen, like, just watching the documentary and hearing that, like, just that stuff is enough to convince someone. But I'm a hockey guy, so I know, like I've heard you on like the fights on YouTube, and you know, Captain McIsaac has been on my show, and like, you know what I mean? Like, trust me, man, I've talked about you a couple times, like indirectly about the same topic, and you were so good at it. You were so entertaining. You are. This is right now, present tense. You are, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited, dude, because my MO is to be the enthusiastic guy. Like, this is something that I'm looking to have as a career. That's why I said to Charlie, like, when I signed the contract, I said, Charlie, you know, like, I'm hoping a couple of years down the road from now, you know, we'll be, you know, having a couple Sprites, and, you know, we'll be laughing about, remember your first gig, on your first TV gig? It was that first Ice Wars in Enoch. You know what I mean? At the casino. You know what I mean? And because I plan on doing this for the next 25 years, Phil. So, man, I'm telling you, man, you guys are very, very important to me, man. You guys are the beginning, and I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to give everything I got, buddy, and I plan to have so much fun with you. So now, listen, you're not going to get off this easy. My listeners want to know about Phil, man, too, right? So we're going to get back into Ice Wars, because I find that I start talking about Ice Wars, like the guys that are working with me right now, they're a little bit annoyed, because, man, they're like, if you don't stop talking about Ice Wars, we're gonna start challenging you to fights. You know what I mean? And you know, they're joking and stuff, but I like to go to the beginning, Phil. I like to go to the beginning with my big characters. I want to talk about the Bronx, bro. Is that the official birthplace, or is that just where you grew up?
Nah, it's where I was born and raised. I stayed there until my early 20s. I lived in the same house pretty much my entire life growing up, and I finally left New York to continue my broadcast career. And yeah, born and raised. And I was not a big hockey fan growing up. So, you know, you have the Rangers, you have the Islanders. I had an allegiance with the Islanders growing up. It was because my older brother was an Islander fan, so I kind of like followed in his footsteps a little bit, but it wasn't my sport. I was more of a baseball guy and a basketball guy as a kid, like what you would normally see in that part of New York. And
New York
you didn't
Mets.
really get a lot of kids playing hockey. And there was one kid, I went to school with one kid that played ice hockey. So he was known as the kid that played hockey. Like, that's how you didn't see it. There were two. There was him who went to my school, and another kid that I'd play floor hockey with, Eric Lang, who's actually the head coach at AIC. He went to college. He went to play college hockey at AIC, and he's actually a really successful Division I college coach. AIC's gone to the tournament for the last 3 or 4 years. He's kind of taken that program in Atlantic hockey and has made it a perennial top 20 team. But it was so rare to see anyone play ice hockey from the Bronx. He was the kid, though. Those were the two kids that played hockey. And I didn't get into hockey until I started calling it. When I was with the St. Louis Eagles in the USHL, they were a one and done team. I kind of fell into that job because I was working in minor league baseball, and the owner of the minor league team that I was calling games for, Ken Wilson, who did the St. Louis Blues for a million years. He was their television guy, and owning the baseball team was like his little side hustle. He got involved with the hockey team, and he asked me to kind of jump on. He's like, hey, you're already here. You want to call hockey? I'll kind of tutor you up a little bit. And that's how it got started. So I kind of fell into it.
Wow. That's cool, dude. So like you mentioned that was my next thing that I was going to get into, because I really want to get into your family a little bit. You mentioned you have a brother. How many siblings do you have?
It was just him. It was just my older brother and me growing up. Yeah.
And how many years older? How many years older is he than you?
4. He was 4 years older.
Okay. Right on. So, and where I'm going with this, Phil, is like, it seems so common. It's always a common thing with some of the bigger characters that are on my show. There's always an older sibling that, you know, if it was a guy that was like a super tough guy on my show, you know, he had an older brother that was always beating him up, and that's what got him tough. Or in your case, if it was an older brother that kind of gave you direction, kind of gave you confidence, like, were you hanging around with him and his buddies a lot? Like, were you getting kind of a more mature look at things at a young age?
It's interesting in some respects, yes. And then in other respects, we could not have been any more different.
Okay.
You know, he was more of the kind of like the bad boy. Like, he was the one that got into trouble and stuff like that. And you know, he didn't finish school, but he went out and he started working at kind of a young age. And I was the complete opposite. Like, I was the bookworm growing up. I was, you know, I mean, I got into, you know, my share of fights and stuff, but not that many. But that wasn't who I was. We did have a shared love of sports. So we all, you know, we loved the same teams, you know, the New York Mets, the New York Knicks, the New York Giants. And, you know, we lived and died as children with those sports teams. So that's really what we had in common, more so than anything else. Did we have our share of fights? Absolutely. Did I have my share of fights with his friends? And some of them were pretty scary, tough guys. Absolutely. So that was one thing. I never backed down as a kid from any of them. And if I had to go, you know, pull the baseball bat out of the closet or the tennis racket to, you know, not that I play tennis, for some reason I had one. I had to, like, you know, defend myself on occasion. I would do that. So, you know, you kind of grow up pretty quick when you have an older sibling, like you said, especially with some of those tough guys. That's where they learn how to fight. In a sense, that's kind of how I learned how to fight as well, just in a little bit of a different sense.
Man, yes, and I appreciate you sharing that. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes, but just to add to what you just said, man, you have no idea. Like I don't know if it's the original sheriff, Scott Parker. If it's him, I think it is him. Or Vandenbush, Ryan Vandenbush. He has a brother that's like 6 or 7 years older than him, and they would just fight toe to toe in the front yard, and the mom would get all upset and like, you know what I mean? He's just like, man, my brother he just taught me how to take a punch so good. At the time I got to pro, I was like, man, this is nothing. I got this my whole childhood from my older brother. Right? So like, it's interesting. It's very interesting. What I find this interesting is that you, my friend, I was doing my research and I was reading that as early as high school, you kind of knew that you wanted to do the sports broadcasting, right?
Yeah, you know, and here's the funny thing. I was a shy kid. I was a quiet kid. I didn't talk very much. But being such a big sports fan and not an athlete by any stretch of the imagination, and you probably hear this from 90% of guys that or gals that do play-by-play. It's like, well, I couldn't play the sport, but I really love sports and want to be involved. So that was kind of, you know, how you get involved in sports play-by-play. And for me, there's a radio station in New York City, WFUV, and they'd have a weekend sports talk show. And I used to call into the show. So I was like really jazzed up on sports talk. And I thought, I'm going to be one of those guys that go and just talk sports 3-4 hours a day. So I went to Fordham University. Like, I picked the college that I went to specifically because they had this radio station that had a show that students hosted. And I got involved on the sports staff, and that's where I kind of really caught the bug fully. But yeah, going in from high school, I had a sense this is what I wanted to do, which is pretty funny because at the time there was like, well, Phil, you're so quiet. You don't really talk like you don't seem cut out for this. You don't seem right. And I'm like, well, this is kind of what I want to do. And, you know, the funny thing is when you get to call these radio shows, it's not, you get to be someone different. You get to kind of put on that little bit of a persona. You don't have to worry about, you know, talking in front of a crowd of people in a room or something. So it's a little bit different. So that kind of helped me get out of my shell a little bit, and then getting involved with the sports staff at WFUV. And then that kind of worked its way into play-by-play in terms of doing the play-by-play workshops with Marty Glickman, who was a legendary sports announcer in New York City back in the 1950s and 60s. And was the original announcer of the New York Knicks, and he called the Giants, the football Giants for years and stuff. So I learned from him. And that's how I learned about basically how to do play-by-play, not in hockey, mind you, but in other sports. But, his lessons were really well suited for what I wanted to do in those sports, and then eventually in hockey. So that's kind of how I caught the bug at a pretty early age.
Well, and thanks again for sharing that, buddy.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm intrigued by it. You are a very, very humble guy, Phil? Like you're very humble, man, the way that you explain things. Because in my research, I took it a little bit different, like what you just explained. First of all, and I think it was when you were in your sophomore year in high school, you started being a regular character.
Yeah, well, it was. Yeah.
Mr. Milwaukee, my friend. No, we're telling the listeners,
you definitely did your homework. That's the interesting thing is a lot of the callers on this particular show had these personas and their own nicknames. And I was Mr. Milwaukee, and I picked them. I was a Mets fan. There was already like a Mr. Met. Well, Mr. Met's the mascot, but there was someone else that was like a Mr. Met. And Milwaukee was the team that I liked when they were in the American League. Robin Yount and Paul Molitor were like two of my guys growing up. I had a Paul Molitor poster in my room and a Robin Yount poster in my room, growing up. So, I used to wear the old school Brewers hat, the fitted hat. And I had one of those in my collection. So I picked that name. And most of the time I talked about baseball. Probably about 90% of the time. I was a complete baseball junkie with all the stats and all of that kind of stuff growing up, more so than any other sport, not even close. I was a baseball geek. And so that was the character that I kind of, took on, when I was a pretty young age. And again, it was a persona. It was a character. It was a little bit different. When I was on the air calling the show for, 5 to 10 minutes on a Sunday night at, 12 midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, when, there probably weren't a lot of people listening, that I could be somebody different.
Dude, I couldn't believe it when I was reading this. I'm like, this is unreal, because obviously, I'm a big nickname guy, right? Like everyone in my family has a nickname, and you know what I mean, Phil? Like, so I really appreciate that. And just to be a big enough character to be labeled as Mr. Milwaukee and have a following. Like I was reading, you had a following, a little fan base. It seemed to be a really big deal, man. And I love stuff like that. Like that is so much character it takes to do that. It's also brave, man. You're also putting yourself out there, because it doesn't matter if you're calling yourself Mr. Milwaukee or Mr. Anonymous. You're still putting yourself out there for people to, like, how mean people can be, to just rip apart or criticize. And you were proud of what you were saying. You loved it, you had a passion for it, and so did everyone else.
Yeah,
everybody loved it, man.
and I think I was lucky to be able to do that at the time, because I think it's so much harder now. Yeah, I think in one sense it's a lot easier to put yourself out now because of social media. I mean, anyone can do this. It's real easy to kind of put yourself out there. But you mentioned it, like just the bullying and abuse and a lot of that stuff that goes on. It's real easy to just knock somebody down. And now, they tell you when you're on social media, never read the comments, right? Never read the comments, because you might be loved by 90% of people, 95% of people. It's that 5%. Yeah. It's those 2 or 3 people that are going to kind of take a swipe at you, whether it's warranted or not. Those are the hardest ones to handle. And you were a pro athlete, for years, and I'm sure, you're under a magnifying glass as well. It's like, you have one tough night, in a game, or you lose a fight or something. Here's the thing. Every hockey fighter loses fights, right? We all know that. Like no one goes undefeated. Like that's just how it is. Yep. You have good nights, you have bad nights. But yep. The crowd can, get behind you and, and be for you. They could be against you. And, how do you get up from that? So, I mean, it's a lot harder now, I think, for people trying to come up and kind of make a name for themselves. So in a sense, I was lucky to be able to kind of do that. I don't know if, 15-year-old Phil today would, if I had that personality now, I'd be able to kind of stick through it. It might've broke me. So I'm glad I was able to kind of come up when I did.
Yeah, dude. And I mean, like that type of story is like that's the makings for a movie, buddy, in my opinion. You know what I'm saying? 15-year-old, Mr. Milwaukee goes to the, the original play-by-play of the original Bad Boys, goes to this, goes to that. But we're gonna get to goes to this, goes to that. Before that, though, I wanted to point out what you just mentioned earlier, just so the listeners can understand. So you attended, and I just want to make sure I'm pronouncing it right, Fordham University, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then so what is it? It's an affiliation that the station has with the school.
Yeah.
It's like a special program. Can you explain that? Because that's where you started your career, correct?
Sure. Yeah. WFUV is actually, it's an FM radio station in New York. It's actually a really well funded, managed radio station that for 95% of the people that work there, it's a professional radio station. It's a music format. They have full-time DJs and a big news department and stuff. And they have this really small sports department, a little bit of a bigger sports department now, maybe about 20 or 30 people. And those are the students that get to work on air. No one else really gets to work on the air. And when I went to school, this was before you had streaming or anything like that. We would do the basketball games and the football games in this weekend sports talk show. But the station is actually owned by the university. The station is actually on campus in Keating Hall, which is like a big lecture hall on campus. So it was part of the school. And it wasn't an education program in terms of like, I was a business major at Fordham. I had nothing to do with communications other than working at the radio station. Like anyone that was a student can go and volunteer and try to get on the sports department, or you had other students doing other things, just not on the air over there. But it was a great kind of practical training background to get into broadcasting. And we had professional support. So it wasn't just the students by themselves, but I mentioned Marty Glickman, and you'd have the professionals that worked at the radio station. So you had people to look up to kind of learn along the way on how to like properly act in a work environment in radio and grow from there.
Now, and thanks for that, because that's I love knowing stuff like that. But in the grand scheme of things, Phil, wouldn't that be the best way to start? Like
it is.
You guys had the best advantage, man.
We had a great advantage, and the students that are there still do have a really good advantage. And the pedigree of sportscasters that come out. And I know we're talking about the Trashers and a lot of the stuff that I've done. And I'll be honest, in the grand scheme of things, there's so many more broadcasters with higher profiles than me. I'm pretty low on that totem pole. When you mention, Mike Breen, who's the voice of the NBA, was a Fordham student. Michael Kay, who now does, if you watch, he does the Yankees on, yes, he's done that for years, but now he's got that ESPN K-Cast with A-Rod, with Alex Rodriguez. They do that on Sunday nights. Bob Papa, who's the voice of the New York Giants. Those are just a few. Vince Scully, like the greatest baseball announcer ever, was a Fordham baseball player, but he was also a student in the 40s that worked at WFUV. So that's a much different era than what we go through now. But there's so many guys. Chris Carino, who does the Brooklyn Nets. Most of the New York City sports teams have a broadcaster that's a Fordham guy. It's either Fordham or it's Syracuse. You have all the Syracuse guys, the Bob Costases of the world and the Iron Eagles of the world, and Mike Tirico and guys like that. And then you have like the Fordham guys, and it's a constant little back and forth battle between those two universities out of New York State. I think if not for the Netflix documentary, you wouldn't really hear or talk much about me. So I got to thank Netflix for that, and of course the Danbury Trashers for helping to put me on that map.
Yeah, the non-hockey person, Phil. But a hockey person, trust me, we know about the Danbury Trashers. Mm-hmm. We know about the voice of the Danbury Trashers. Trust me, buddy. You got more fans than you think, man. Trust me. But now, so listen, the Danbury Trashers, the documentary that we're gonna get into before we go. What I really want to speak to you next about is when you first got to Bridgeport. The Bridgeport Sound Tigers, the amount of time and experience that you have working with that team, the amount of players that you've seen graduate through that system, the experience that you've had with the Islanders. I want you to get into this, man, because it's pretty freaking cool, Phil.
It really is. And sometimes you have to be in the right place at the right time. And, unfortunately the Trashers never got to a season 3.
Yeah.
But I was able to go right from Danbury to Bridgeport, and how that happened was there was a radio opening, and our first season head coach in Danbury, Todd Sterling, who's still an NHL scout, but he coached with us the first year, and I had kept in touch with him. Well, his dad was the coach of the New York Islanders at that time, at that actual moment, during the 05-06 season. He was coaching the Islanders. And before that, he was the original head coach of Bridgeport, of the Sound Tigers. He was their first ever head coach. So I called Todd, who called his dad, who called the president of the Bridgeport Sound Tigers. And that's how I was able to kind of get my demo to the front of the line, so to speak. Because when these openings happen, especially in the American Hockey League, and you just get deluged. You're a general manager. You just get deluged with like unsolicited demos and CDs and whatnot. And and oftentimes, do they want to sit there and listen to them? Probably not. They got a million other things to do. So I was able to get my stuff to the front of the line, and they liked my work. They had me do some additional demo work for some pre-tape Sound Tiger stuff. And so I end up getting this job, and it was such a great experience. And the funny thing is, when I came in, I was announced on the same day that the Bridgeport Sound Tigers announced who their coaching staff was going to be for the 06-07 season. The head coach for that year was this guy, Dan Marshall, who had never coached in the American Hockey League, was never even a pro coach at any level or an assistant. Wow. What he was known for, he was a skills guy, and he was on Long Island. He coached junior hockey and stuff. He worked with Chara. So from what I was told, he was a guy that worked with Chara when Chara was like really raw, couldn't really skate. And, was just kind of like, here's this big monster of a, player. What do we do with him? And Dan Marshall was the guy that worked on his skills.
Wow.
And was close with the ownership and was tight with Charles Wong, who was the owner at the time. So he makes Dan Marshall the head coach, with a ton of assistants. I'd never seen an American Hockey League team that had 4 full-time assistants. And one of them was Jack Capuana, who would eventually take over as that head coach and then would go on to coach the Islanders. But here was the funny thing about this. So for the press conference, this was when Neil Smith was there for the 6 weeks that he was around with the team. So I meet Neil Smith, like they bring Neil Smith around to all the offices before the press conference. I meet Neil Smith, talk to him for a few minutes. We do this whole press conference. The next day he's gone. He's out. He quits like right after that press conference. I don't know if it's exactly the next day. It was pretty close to it. And there's the whole shakeup in the front office. And I think at that point, Pat LaFontaine was sort of involved, and then he kind of left the organization, didn't want to be involved. And then lo and behold, that's how Garth Snow becomes the general manager. The backup goaltender from the season before becomes the GM. That's how I was kind of christened into the Bridgeport Sound Tigers organization. I'm thinking to myself, I left Danbury, and we all know the stuff that happened in Danbury. I'm like, what did I get myself into? Think about that for a second. Think about that. I'm like, I left this, here's a team that couldn't get a season 3. And those of you that saw the documentary understand all the stuff that happened. And I go into the Islanders organization. I'm like, oh my God, am I going to be around and sit? Like, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to make it to game 1? I did. And it was a great experience for 9 years. And, the great thing about the American Hockey League, so many players come through. Most guys that end up in the NHL go through that league. It's so rare to see a guy make that jump from juniors right to the NHL, or guys that come from college and go to the NHL without at least spending some time in the American League. So, I got to see from 2006 all the way through 2015, just about every Islander, playing in Bridgeport, for either a short time or for a fairly long time. And a good chunk of the roster were guys that I covered even still in 2022, all these years later, are guys that kind of began their career with the Sound Tigers, and then players from other teams around the league as well. When you get to see them, I remember Giroux during his rookie year with the Philadelphia Phantoms. And he was, in the American League. Joe Pavelski was in Worcester with the Worcester Sharks. And, some of these guys are going to be NHL Hall of Fame players, getting to watch them start their career in the American Hockey League. And what was also great was when I worked in the American Hockey League, you still had the tough guys. You still had the toughness. And Bridgeport was a team that always played pretty heavy.
Yeah.
When it came to toughness, after not my first season, they were a little bit light in that department, but after that, I mean, you would have 3 or 4 guys every year up until maybe like my last 1 or 2 years that would drop the gloves and put up just huge numbers of penalty minutes. And, at a time where most teams would maybe have 1 or 2, we'd have like 3 or 4.
So now was Trevor Gillies one of those guys?
Oh yeah. The Gill train, of course. Oh,
the Gill train has been a special guest.
Okay. Okay.
Shrimp's been a special guest. He was there during your tenure as well, right?
Robbie Shrimp was there not very long with us. I think Robbie Shrimp, I called a lot of games that Robbie Shrimp played in with other AHL teams, with Wilkes-Barre, with Springfield. Yeah. I think he did a rehab stint with us.
Okay.
When he was signed to the Islanders, he went right up to the Island. Okay. And here's the funny thing about this. So for years, Robbie Shrimp's in the league, and Jack Capuano loved Robbie Shrimp. When I mean loved Robbie Shrimp, whenever we played Springfield or Wilkes-Barre, I'm doing the pregame interview. Half the pregame interview is Cappy talking about Robbie Shrimp. He's not even on the team that I'm covering. And he's just going on and on and on about Robbie Shrimp. So eventually got him to come play for the team. It seemed like a match made in heaven, and just the skill. I mean, he's such a skilled player from when he was in the league. But yeah, Trevor Gillies, just
Gill train.
Talk about one of the most, now, first of all, just a heart of gold, this guy, but the intensity. I'd walk around the hallways, before a game, snagging guys for pregame interviews and stuff like that. I was around the Danbury Trashers, right? I don't get intimidated easily. Watching Trevor Gillies in his pregame routine, talk about intimidating. Like if I'm like, if I take a step in the wrong direction, I'm in the middle of the train track, something can happen. Like he was just that focused and just like in a zone that, like, you just get a look and you're like, oh crap, I gotta go this way. I gotta go the other way, but just so tough. And some of his fights were, legendary fights. I remember calling a fight, him and Justin Johnson up in Manchester one night, and Johnny eventually became a Sound Tiger. My last year, he was with the Sound Tigers, and just what a brawl those two guys had. And I mean, every fight that Trevor Gillies, I mean, if you didn't get knocked out pretty quick, you were in for a battle. But yeah, he's just a total beaut.
Yeah, buddy, he is a total beaut. I'm blessed to be friends with Trevor now, but really we knew each other this whole time through mutual friends. Mm-hmm. And I spent some time in Augusta, Georgia, doing a hockey school with my best friend Dan Sullivan, and I think Gillies his wife is from there, or he played for one of the teams.
Yeah, I think he played with the Lynx for a bit. I mean, he's played for so many teams, but I want to say he played with the Lynx. Yeah.
Yeah, but he was living there in the summer. Mm-hmm. And I remember him pulling up in some classic car. And I know he's
I know the car. Yeah, he had that car in Bridgeport. Yeah.
Okay, so he had it in Bridgeport.
Yeah, he had that car there.
That in Georgia. Mm-hmm. And man, he's a really, really cool dude, man.
Yeah.
And a big time character. You probably had a blast covering that guy.
Oh, it was him. He was on the same team. And I want to say, we had Pascal Morency, who was just, not a big guy, but just another big character guy that, was undersized. And then when he got into a fight, it was absolutely beautiful. Michael Haley, who just retired after last season. He's coaching in the OHL right now.
Yeah.
He was on those teams, and a lot of these guys kind of like carry over. Like Jeremy Yablonsky was with us for a bit, and
Diablo.
Yabo. And there was a point because Gillies was with us, and then he did end up like basically full time on the island for a couple of years after that. So he was around when some of these guys were down the early part of Brett Gallant's career. Brett Gallant was with us, probably good 4 or 5 seasons. And then obviously he's been in Cleveland now for a long time. Mitch Fritz. So it's just so many guys have come through and just so much toughness. What's that?
Huge man.
Oh my God. It was like fighting Donkey Kong. He just punched down on you. Like it was just, that was a good fight. I remember there was a fight with him and Yabo. Yabo was still playing for Binghamton. And those guys were going at it. And I want to say was it Fritz? One of those guys that like had the jersey over their head. I think it was Yabo had his face covered. He's still wailing away and connecting, just really wailing away on Fritz. And, just, so much toughness. And, I'm sure you've probably dropped the gloves against a few of these guys that have kind of crossed paths over the years.
Fritzy was, I think Fritzy was the tallest guy I ever fought. Cause Mitch was like, what was he? 6'9"?
He was 6'8". You know, it was funny. I didn't call this game. This was an exhibition game, and talk about a height differential. Cause I know you're big, but, Michael Haley fought him once in an exhibition game. Haley's about 5'10". Yeah. And Fritz is like 6'8". This was, and I want to say Haley was a rookie with us. And he ended up starting the year in Utah in the coast, and then came with us like a month or two in the season, but he was with us during preseason, and he like completely handled Mitch Fritz. Like, I don't know how, like that didn't happen very often. So that was like 2007. I want to say that was. And watching those two guys fight was hysterical because here was this guy 6'8". He's fighting 5'10". Michael Haley in an exhibition game, and like basically a rec rink in Cromwell, Connecticut. Like this thing had like no seats. But Fritzy was a guy. So he was I guess for most people, he was the biggest guy that anyone ever fought. I mean, he's 6'8". For years was just the biggest guy in the league.
Yeah, 100%, man. I'll never forget fighting a guy that tall. So the other thing, Phil, like before we get back into Ice Wars, because there's a couple of things that I want to add to our Ice Wars talk. There's a lot of other, man, I'm trying to pick and choose, right? What there's so many things that you've done, so many cool things you've accomplished, and so many things that we can talk about that I know the listeners are interested, like stuff like the NHL draft, stuff like the features on MSG, brother. Like, is there anything that kind of stands out that we can talk about, like to do with those type of things? Yeah,
those are fun events. I got to do 2 NHL drafts, and thinking about those 2 particular years was 2011 and 2012, and the Islanders had a really good first pick in 2011 and Ryan Strome. And then the next year they had a not so good first round pick in Griffin Reinhart, who didn't really pan out, for the team, but he did get them a first round pick back. So it was just fun being there, whether it was in St. Paul or Pittsburgh, just kind of being around the front office, being around like right there when players would get picked and they come right off the podium and I'd be the first guy to talk to them. So, when Ryan Strome gets picked, 5th overall, they literally pull him off the stage. And before he goes to talk to anyone else in the media, they're bringing him in to talk to me. And there's like a draft party at the Nassau Coliseum. So like there's, a few thousand people, watching on the Jumbotron, and we're like streaming it back live. And this was 2000. You didn't really do a lot of this. Like people weren't doing this back in 2011, where you're streaming live to another facility. Now it's like, I could just do that on my phone. Right. So, but technology was a bit different back then. And probably, so those drafts were fun talking to, some of those guys. I remember, talking to Adam Pelech, who's, probably the Islanders' best defenseman now. And he wasn't even there. He didn't even go to his draft. Like, here, think about that. He's a premier defenseman in the NHL, and he had a bunch of older brothers. I think a couple of them were first round picks, and he doesn't even show up at the draft, but they get him at home. So we like patch him in on a telephone, and I interview him on draft day, and he was just like, whatever. He wasn't very excited. I don't know if he thought, I don't think he thought he would have been picked higher, because normally you show up at that point, right? If you're going to be a higher pick, you're going to come to your draft. And even guys that are, just happy to get picked show up. And so that was pretty cool getting to talk with him. And then a lot of these other guys that would come on in and eventually spend some, quality time. in the NHL. But probably the funniest story was in a sense breaking. So if you remember Lubo Visnovsky.
Yes.
So you remember him, he had played in the league for a long time. I think the Islanders picked him up from San Jose. I don't even know what they gave him.
I think
it wasn't much. And he's halfway around the world. And we tracked him down. It was a draft trade. It was during the draft that Islanders picked them up. And they're like, yeah, we want you to talk to him. You know, this is like, and we're going to stream this out on the website and people are going to be able to watch this interview. I'm like, you know, track him down. Yeah, we'll find him. And they found him. Like, it was the middle of the night, whatever time it was. I think we woke him up. And B, I'm not really sure he knew he was traded at this point. I think he might have heard something from his agent, but you know, it was like a 3 or 4 minute interview. And basically what I heard on the other end of the phone was a lot of confusion and not really sure he wanted to come play for the Islanders. At that point, he did eventually come and play, but you know, we totally surprised the guy, you know, just kind of like out of nowhere, like, hey, you got traded to the Islanders and now you're on, you know, the Islanders website streaming to you live, you know, doing that. And then the MSG stuff, you know, getting to do the MSG stuff was fun. Being able to a few times a year talk to some of our prospects. So there were guys I knew really well and just kind of given the, you know, a flavor of what's to come for some of the, you know, players down the line, you know, guys like Brock Nelson and Calvin DeHaan. And, you know, we did do Griffin Reinhart. We did a cool one. My favorite one that we did was kind of it was like a day in the life. It was almost like a, you know, when they would do like the 24/7 type of thing. And we did that with the Sound Tigers game. So like we started with them, like from the pregame skate all the way through the game, and the Islanders and the Sound Tigers won the game, which was good. So it was kind of like that. And that was kind of fun because it was a little bit different than just sitting down with a few guys talking about like, you know, is Aaron Ness going to be, you know, a big time Islander? And he wasn't, but you know, he was a great guy and he's still playing pro hockey. You know, or Brock Nelson or Casey Cizikas. Like we got to do a lot of features with guys that are still, you know, pretty prominent in the NHL and, you know, that kind of stuff was fun. And then getting the opportunities to kind of jump up and do some NHL games that was the best part about it. Right. So I got to back up, you know, Chris King on some radio stuff. And, you know, they bring me on a few road trips a year to do color commentary on radio, which is not really my forte, but it was fun to go out there and do some color commentary and, you know, fly the charter and do the whole thing and get the NHL experience. And I really cherish that. And, you know, still remember that to this day. And I mentioned before that was the one thing in terms of NHL games. I mentioned being there for when Ryan Strome was drafted. I did get to call Ryan Strome's first NHL goal. So I did an Islanders game. It was at the Coliseum against the Stars. And the Islanders won that game. It was a 7-3 game. They're actually trailing 2-0 in that game. And Ryan Strome scored his first NHL goal that night. And then John Tavares had a 5-point game. He had a hat trick and 5 points, which he just totally erupted. You know, just like a monstrous game. And that was like the first regular season NHL game that I called. I would do preseason games with them. I'd always do like a couple, you know, 2 or 3 preseason games and get to do some play-by-play and we'd stream those out. So it was more of a TV style broadcast. So getting those opportunities and getting a chance, because not everyone does. And, you know, it's now more guys do. It's funny. Like this season, you're seeing a lot more AHL names get their break because of COVID. Like so many, like eventually, like everyone gets it. So like all these NHL guys have to miss a week or two here and there. So the AHL guys get the call. That didn't happen, you know, back in 2014. Guys weren't getting sick, or if they were sick, they didn't care. They didn't give up the microphone very easily. So to be able to do that, you know, not everyone gets that chance. So you know, it's just a great opportunity and really fortunate to be able to say, hey, you know what, I've called some NHL games. Because not everybody gets that. And you know, I would love to get back to that and be able to do it. But, you know, there's a lot of guys that are pretty good at it. You know, I like to say I'm pretty good at calling a hockey game, but there's a lot of other guys as well. So that's really competitive. And it's just like the athletes, right? It's just like the players. You know, so many really good players in the American Hockey League never get that chance to play full time at the NHL level. It's so hard to crack, you know, that full-time lineup. And, you know, for a number of reasons. It could be, you're not a drafted guy. You're a little bit smaller than someone else. You're half a step slower. But you know what? If you gave them the chance, they'd probably be productive. They'd probably be a really good player. I've seen guys go through like that. I saw, a guy like Keith Aucoin, who was like a little undersized guy, Division III college hockey guy, become a really good, decent NHL player, because he eventually got that opportunity. But that doesn't happen for everybody.
Absolutely, man. And like, I love the perspective that you have on this, because man, I'm telling you, it's valuable stuff. Like I crave these type of conversations, Phil. So I appreciate it. Trust me. So now I wanted to go back to the Ice Wars, because really, man, I'm just so excited to work with you and Chris. And I don't know if there's going to be any more additions. If there is, that's great. But just with me, you and Chris, we started kind of getting into the dynamics of it and the advantages of us being the people that, that Charlie and AJ and Jimmy went with. And like I said, like, I'm very proud of it. I'm going to embrace it as much as I can. But this is what I want people to know they're getting when they tune into the pay-per-view. If they make the trip to Enoch. Now, I'm a little bit confused, man, between the Enoch and Enoch. I believe it's Enoch. I believe it's pronounced Enoch. So I'm going to keep going with Enoch. Okay.
That sounds fine to me. I look, I'm from south of the Canadian border. I'm here in Canada. I will go with whatever I'm told to say. It's all good.
There you go. So now, Phil, as I was mentioning before, you're the only play-by-play voice of the original Bad Boys of Hockey. You really brought that part of the game, that intensity of the game, that uniqueness of hockey that we have, combat in the sport. That's allowed. It's penalized, but it's allowed. Mm-hmm. You brought it to life. You brought the animation to a whole other level. Okay. The people that tune in pay-per-view live, however they see it after the fact, that's what they're going to get. They're going to get a treat. They're going to get someone that's been proven that he can really take it to the next level, bring things to life. Now, Mr. Chris Therien, okay, this guy was the voice of the Philadelphia Flyers for a very long time. Played almost 800 games in the NHL. I'm fresh off the stats because he was recently, a guest on the show, as you are today. But the point is that he is a very established kind of broadcasting host where he's really going to take control. He's really going to let the people know exactly what's going on. He's going to be able to explain how the formats are going to work and everything. And he's going to be very clear and to the point. Now, me, my friend, as we mentioned before, I competed in the last tournament. I competed in the last tournament of this liking, right? So not only am I going to give the insight of what the fighter's thinking, of how he prepared, of what it's like, of how he can possibly come back at this point, but the insight that I'm going to be able to provide, I'm going to try to make it so entertaining, so informative that the people tuning in, they're going to really get a different type of angle on the fighting. I know when people watch the UFC, when they watch boxing, they have, analysts that have done it before, but this is something that's only happened. It's only happened twice before. You know what I'm saying? So it's incredible. It's incredible. Like our team, what I'm trying to outline here is our broadcast team is priceless right now. Like the job that Charlie, AJ Galante and Jimmy Galante did putting us together. I'm so confident and proud of it, Phil, that I just can't wait. And I wanted the listeners and anyone else that's tuning into this to understand what they're going to be getting on May 21st in Enoch, Alberta, at the River Creek Casino.
I'm so excited, and I am excited that you're part of this because of what you like you said, what you bring to the table is someone that's been there, not just a guy that's played pro hockey. Obviously, you've done that for a long time, but in this exact atmosphere. The rules might be slightly different at this point, but close enough. Now, who did you fight? Who did you fight back in? Was it 2010?
So Swanson was also
Mm-hmm.
a fighter in that. How the format was in Finland was there was 8 fighters. Okay, so there was 2 1-minute rounds, the same as Ice Wars. Okay, and we wore UFC type gloves,
Okay.
which is going to be very similar to Ice Wars. And the area was the neutral zone. Okay, it was in an arena that had a first league Finnish team, like a Finnish elite league in the tier 1. So it was like a big stadium arena with seats all the way around. It was spectacular. It was one of the best experiences I've ever had. The fighters that come to Ice Wars in 3 weeks, they're gonna have the best experience they've ever had. Any type of combat warrior. It doesn't have to be a hockey player. You could be a UFC guy that knows how to skate, that somehow finagled his way into this event, and he's going to have the same experience that the hockey guys are going to have. When you step into this type of combat, when you know who you're fighting, like you mentioned earlier in the show, you know that there's no one there to save you. You're in there, and it's you or him. This is a pay-per-view event. Everybody's watching. It's only the third of its kind in history. There's so many storylines to get excited about here, and you're participating. Pride that the pride that the fighters will have, the intensity. It's I can't even explain it, man. You know what it is? Like there's an aura that's in the air when you know something's gonna happen.
Oh yeah,
that's the aura. Phil is gonna be all night long in this competition.
Here a couple of things, and you bring this up when you talk about it's 2 things. It's the atmosphere and it's the fighters, right? So there may be some guys that aren't, big time hockey guys, but they can skate some and they can fight. And with this, it's you talk about that puncher's chance, right? This isn't how I think about a guy. And when he was with the Trashers, Brad Wingfield was a guy that, he could throw punches. But if you watch a Brad Wingfield fight during the Danbury Trashers era, it literally was like watching mixed martial arts on ice. His goal was to get you down and ground and pound you, which I don't think you can get away with it in this type of atmosphere. So you got to be able to punch and connect. So the hockey fighters, and I'm sure you fought tons of them where they want to just get leverage on you to get you down. It's not about how many punches you can throw. You're at a disadvantage in something like that. So if you're a guy that can stay on his feet and punch, even if you're not, great skater, as long as you can stay on your feet and throw punches, you have a chance to score some points if you can keep that going. The atmosphere is going to be, I think, so unique and different compared to a big hockey arena, compared to, and the last 2 were in hockey arenas. This is basically the same type of arena you would have a mixed martial arts show. Like I saw the map, the arena map, and they actually had an octagon in the center of the seating map. So they've done MMA style shows. And I think that's what we're going to be in store for. So a little bit more of an intimate crowd. And I think what you're talking about, that something is in the air, you're going to feel that even more so. Like just if you're in a boxing arena watching something, there's something a little bit different about that than when you're in kind of like a bigger hockey arena where you still have that. It's almost like they're like in a mixed martial arts atmosphere, they're on top of you. Like they're literally on top of you. Danbury gave you that a little bit because it was such a small rink and the sound would reverberate off of all the metal that was in the building. And I think psychologically, it's going to feel a little bit different when you feel like the crowd is literally on you, as opposed to you can kind of like distance yourself a little bit from it.
100%. Binghamton is another rink.
Similar.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So yeah, man, I'm right there with you, buddy. It's a different type of electricity. It's going to be so awesome, Phil. Like, I'm just going to go over it again. Ladies and gentlemen, May 21st, River Cree Resort and Casino in Enoch, Alberta. Guys, FITE TV is who you would order for the pay-per-view. It's only $19.99, ladies and gentlemen. This is only the 3rd time of its kind in history. And we're so excited. They've announced a few fighters already, guys. And man, are these guys ever big characters, man. That's the coolest thing, Phil.
Mhm.
This type of stuff, just similar to the UFC.
Oh,
When
yeah.
you know who Conor McGregor is fighting, you got to follow Conor McGregor. You got to learn about him. You got to know what his character is, and then you got to know who's his opponent's character, and you learn, and there's storylines, and then they come together, and it's a clash of the titans, ladies and gentlemen. And there's nothing more exciting than that.
By the way, and I'm going off the script for this because I was actually thinking about this earlier today.
Right on.
And yeah, I would love to see. I don't think I'm sure it's not going to happen this time around. It's really more wishful thinking on my part. I want to see a Legends fight. I want to see a Legends fight. This almost happened this season. If you followed along for a night or two, it never happened. And you probably know where I'm going with this.
Yes.
Sean Avery signed in the ECHL. Sean Avery, who, I know AJ was on his podcast. Sean Avery was a guy that was supposed to be a Danbury Trasher, and he bailed out. And when AJ was on the podcast, Sean Avery had a million excuses, and he ended up going to the Motor City Mechanics with Chris Chelios and on all those other guys from the Red Wings. So anyway, he signed with Orlando, and he has that beef with Matthew Barnaby.
Yeah.
And they're like jawing back and forth. I mean, come on, let's just cut the middleman out. Barnaby said he was going to sign with a Coast League team. Avery did sign with the Coast League team. I don't know what happened. I don't even know if he ever showed up.
Yeah.
I think we just need to settle it. I think we need an Ice Wars to settle those two guys. Why not?
I agree 100%. I would love to see it. I've had Matt on the show as a special guest.
Mm-hmm.
I did ask him about Avery, right? When I just kind of, sent him a couple messages because I heard that he was making the comeback, right? And I'm like, hey, man, are you really going to play? And what's going on with Avery, man? This is like really entertaining. I also sent Mr. Georges LaRock because he's reached out.
Yeah, he said he was going to go play.
Yeah, man. I reached out because George has been
signing
on the
up in the league.
Yeah, man. I asked George too, man, because he's been a guest too. So that's the cool thing, Phil. Like, you know what I mean? Like, once guys come on, like, I can hit them up. So I'm like, are you guys serious? Are you guys really gonna play? Like, this is unbelievable. I was very excited about it. Like, I was calling as a fan to find out.
Yeah.
Right? So
like they're not going to play. Like Sean Avery's not going to play. I mean, he was signing in the league. He had no intent of actually playing.
I know.
Obviously, never stuck around long enough for that. And Barnaby just wanted to fight us. I'm like, come on, we just cut through the middleman. We just settled it in Ice Wars.
You know what? Yes, 100%. And just to add to this, Phil, my brother-in-law, Danny Granger, he's coming up with a lot of cool ideas for Ice Wars as well. He's and you know what? I'll let him make his own announcements. But one thing that I did talk to him about was the legendary thing. Now, he was thinking about like an award for a legend. But you know what? The legendary bout would just be as equally interesting, if not better, my friend.
Oh, I agree with you, buddy. Would be.
Oh yeah, like two rivals that always went at it. Like a Rocky Thompson against so and so, or something like that. Like I think it would be cool. I think Avery would be awesome if he would make it out and him and Barnaby could squash.
Oh, that would just be the run up to the event. Just the chirping back and forth would be worth it between those two guys. And yeah, you're right. I mean, that having some sort of Legends division that's outside of, the actual tournament, because those guys are a lot younger. It's a little bit different when you're having, the 20 something year olds and the early 30 something year olds versus some of these other guys that, they might not be playing competitively anymore, but the punch is the last thing that goes, right? You still got the punch later on in your career. I know John Morasti wanted to participate and he's not going to. He's going to judge. He's supposed to be a judge, but I don't think his wife was too pleased when he said he wanted that. And I saw him either talk about it on a podcast or something. He wanted to be part of it. I think he wanted to fight. He's not going to, and I think he was going to play in the Quebec League this year. There were some rumors, and he's not doing it. He's not playing. But some of these guys, they want to keep going. Like, why not? And those are the names like we kind of grew up with, and for you, some of the guys that you fought. So just to get a chance to watch them drop the gloves once again would be magnificent.
100%. And like Phil, like you mentioned, like guys that aren't playing anymore. So like maybe it would be like a division where you have to have been retired for at least 5 to 10 years, or you know what I mean, something like that. Like the legends over 5 years of retirement already. You know what I mean? And then it's guys that are in kind of a certain age group, and it would be separate from the the lower 30s, 20 something year old players, right?
Yeah. Well, this show is going to be great because I think we're going to start to see some new stars become developed as a result of this show, as a result of the first Ice Wars and hopefully the first of many. And I think, that's their goal. I know for Jimmy and AJ and for Charlie, the goal is to do these, fairly often. And, this is kind of like the first show, but they have, obviously they want it to be a success and not have to wait 10 years, 12 years for the next one. And for some of these guys that maybe didn't become the big names in hockey, this is their chance. This is their opportunity to put their, to kind of put their name on the map and become well-known. And, fight fans are fight fans. You're going to pull in the hockey fight fans or just the casual hockey fans, and you're going to pull in the combat sport fans. So you're pulling in from different fan bases to watch a show like this.
Another thing, just to add to that, Phil, is that these hockey guys, you're talking about a group of people that are so unique from the rest of the sport that they're actually labeled as a tough guy. So you have to think about that. Think for the fight fans out there that aren't necessarily hockey people, just think about that. These are guys that have been labeled tough guys. They are extreme characters that have decided to enter a combat fight tournament. That can't get any more exciting, ladies and gentlemen.
It can't. And, one of these guys had been kicked out of a league. It's almost like a badge of honor if you've been banished from another hockey league and now you're participating in Ice Wars. Speaking of banished, where's Chad Wagner? Do you know where Chad Wagner, right? Where is he these days? We can't find him. He played the 2 games with the Danbury Trashers. He's the guy that went after Mark Potvin in the bench clearing brawl, and he got banned from the league for life. We've never seen him again.
Really?
And we want to find Chad Wag. We don't know where he is. No
Ladies
one knows
and gentlemen,
where he is.
If you know where he is, if you could email the Sheriff Podcast at gmail.com. We need to know.
It's a badge of honor in a strange sense. Nowhere else is it, but maybe for Ice Wars, you get kicked out of a league, it gets you to the front of the line. I don't know.
I don't know, man. This is just, if not, this is more exciting than UFC, in my opinion. I'm starting to see some of these fighters come out with hype videos. And this is something that has never been done before. I'm seeing Amsbury and those guys, Hunter, they're making hype videos.
No, why not? You have Diamond Daniel, you've got, Hunter, the whatever his nickname is. I mean, everyone's got like just crazy nicknames.
It's awesome.
They've got, thousands upon thousands of penalty minutes. And Hunt, and the thing is, Hunter actually is a guy that doesn't have a lot of penalty minutes, but I think people just stayed away from him. He's just so big and monstrous that
scary.
He stayed away. I talked to one guy that played with him with the Iowa Wild. I'm like, well, how good is this dude? Because I never saw him. He was, he didn't get into the league until I was out of the American Hockey League. But one of his teammates is a guy I know who's still in the American Hockey League, and I'm like, can this guy fight? He's, oh yeah, you can chuck him. He's good. He can fight. So like, he's like, you'll be entertained. So I'm real excited to see this guy fight. And I'm just wondering, Curtis Swanson's the third guy. Like I can only imagine the names are going to get more and more exciting and more interesting. You never throw the biggest names out there first. So I'm like the rest of you guys, you and everyone else, like, we're not sure the other 5 fighters or whatever are going to be. So like, I wait every day. I'm constantly on Instagram waiting to see the next drop.
Well, I mean, I'm telling you, I literally get excited for the Ice Wars announcements. I wanted to remind the listeners on social media so that they can get these alerts, just like me and Phil. On Instagram, it's Ice. It's Ice is War.
Ice is
right?
War. Yeah.
on Instagram,
and
Icewars
Twitter.
International on Facebook. And then what was the Twitter, Phil?
It's Ice's War on Twitter too.
On
Same
Twitter
one.
as well. And then Icewars International on Facebook. And guys, I'm telling you, man, this is better than the UFC, the hype, the excitement. I'm waiting for one of these guys to really step up and be the Conor McGregor. I mean, Kingsbury and those guys, Hunter and those guys are doing a great job. And I'm having them both on the show next week, right? So we're going to learn more about them, Phil. Like, the listeners are going to know about every single fighter before this event. We're really going to pump this up. We're really going to create the characters for these guys. They've created it their whole lives, but we're going to embrace with this tournament. And it's really exciting stuff, buddy. And tonight, I honestly feel like I said the same thing to Chris, but I just feel that we get along really, really well.
Oh, yeah.
And because of the dynamics between our broadcast team, that it's going to make it even better for the audience. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that.
Oh, I same here. And just for the fans, this is the first time we've talked. We've not talked, until this, mega podcast, which is running fairly long because we're having such a great time. And it's one of those things. And having been in broadcast, I mean, I've done this for a long time, and it's one of those things, right away when you work with someone and you get into that like back and forth, and if you're going to have kind of that good relationship right off the bat. I feel that right now. And I'm sure with Bundy, it's going to be the same way. He's a complete pro. And I've watched a lot of his interviews and stuff, and he's got such a great story, with his broadcasting background and everything that he's all about, that it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a fun broadcast. And I think that's what we're hoping for the fans that are watching on FITE TV on May 21st, to get that we really enjoy what we're doing. And we hope that y'all that are watching at home are enjoying it as well. And then you're telling, 50 of your friends to go pony up $20 for the next one.
Yes. So my new friend, Phil, before I am assuming that before the 21st, we are going to speak again on the show. I'm going to ask you, will you commit to a part 2 before May 21st?
Absolutely. I'm committed to part 2, 3, 4.
Fantastic.
Totally committed to this. I am so excited. And I'm even thinking about, what happens if this takes off and all the stuff that could kind of come from it. I mean, there's a lot that could be a part of it. You all take baby steps. You got to get the first show in the bank and get that one done. But there's so many things that can, come out of this, and I'm real excited for it.
I am too, buddy. And you know what I mean? I heard that a little hush. There's a rumor that the second one might be in Montreal, in the Ile de Montréal. We're not sure. Just rumors. It's just rumors at this point. But we have to build the excitement, because we want that second one. In order to do the second one, we have to have a successful first one. And right now we have the team in line to do that. So I know I keep going on about it, buddy, but I'm just so excited. And I had such a good time today, buddy. I appreciate, part 2, I want to get more into your journey, Phil, because, man, like I said, I had to pick and choose, when we were going over your career, what we were going to talk about because of the time limit. And I'm looking forward to continuing that, buddy, because I'm a big fan of yours. And I know a lot of the listeners are a big fan of yours as well. So So I wanted to thank the listeners for tuning into another episode of The Sheriff. And I wanted to thank Phil once again for coming on, buddy. Is there anything that you'd like to say before we sign off, my friend?
Oh, first off, thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to be on again, and we'll know more of the fighters, and we'll have some more specifics and details about, the pay-per-view and other things that are kind of leading up to it. So I'm going to be real excited to talk to you about some of those things. And we won't have the actual fighter matchups yet, like who's going to go with who at the start of the show, but you can start to kind of think about what are some of those possibilities going to be, and what these other guys bring to the table. So I'm really excited about that. And we can, of course, I can talk about myself all the time. I mean, that's easy enough to do. I often like to you saw, I would ask you some questions here and there, because I like to know a little bit more about, I want to know a little bit more about you. And then with Chris, same thing. And, kind of build that all up. And I'm just really stoked. I'm just thinking about all the people that are involved with this, and the people that have kind of been involved, whether directly like Charlie and obviously you and Jimmy and AJ and some of the other folks. And then, mind blowing, Kato Kalin's a producer on this thing, like of all people, he's involved with it. And that's just kind of like, a little bit crazy and fun. And Jackie Callan, who's a legendary, the legendary boxing manager. So there's so many different people and so many different characters that are part of this, that it's just, absolutely wild. And it does bring me back in a sense to my days in Danbury, because there were so many different wild characters that were part of that as well. From Jimmy and AJ and the players and the coaching staff and just so many different people. And that's really what made it so much fun. Like, I loved calling the hockey. I loved calling the fights. That was a big part of it for me. But the other big part of it was being part of this big family, this big Danbury Trashers family that, you didn't really feel, you felt a little bit of it in the documentary, but there's like so much more that wasn't even like touched. That was part of it. And the family, like I tell people, they're like, oh, do you still keep in touch with Jimmy and AJ? And I'm like, absolutely. Like, they're family to me, like I really feel that way. And even like reconnecting when we filmed the documentary stuff 3 years ago, it was 2019. When we filmed it 3 years ago, like, I had seen AJ a few times. I would do some kind of, I would do some ring announcing for his boxing stuff. And it had a little brief conversations with Jimmy here and there, but to get right back into it, it was like literally, like season 3 was starting. Like I went from 2006 and, 15 years passed by and like, it felt like the very next day. And even though all those years had passed, and it's such a great feeling.
Yeah, dude. No, I hear you. And that's the beauty about things like this, is it really brings interesting characters together. I'm a big networker and I can't wait to meet all these people too, man.
Oh, it's going to be so great. Excited. It's going to be a blast.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome, man. So yeah, man. So this was great. I had so much fun. I know the listeners did too. And we're going to sign off here, guys. Woo!